Our next session discusses how to recognize and address stigma and bias. And I'd like to welcome Rachael, Waas, Shull, and Sarah Bovee from Legacy Medical Group.
Good morning, everybody. We're so glad to be here together, partnering on this presentation. Allie did such a good job at setting the tone and identifying some of the bigger overarching things, and we're going to take one of those right now over the next hour and break it down and dig into it a little bit, stigma and bias in the perinatal landscape. My name is Rachael. I've been a nurse for 12 years or so. At Randall Children's Hospital and Emmanuel in labor and delivery. And most recently, I'm in the role of clinical nurse educator, and I'm also in school currently for a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner degree.
And I'm going to share my story a little bit, a little backstory. My name is Sarah Bovee, and I'm a peer support specialist and harm reduction doula, specializing in substance use disorder. Thank you. I work with Legacy Project Nurture, and I'm affiliated with Seattle's Harm Reduction Doula Collective. I lost my mother to addiction in 1996 when I was 15 years old. She overdosed on opiates after having been released from jail with a lowered tolerance. Sadly to say that this was right before Narcan was widely available. My history with substances began when I was 15, and although I was sure that I was not going to go down that path, having seen all the things that I had seen and been through growing up, I started with cocaine. I used that for 2 years. I ended up in legal trouble and went to Job Corps as a means of diversion, and separated from the person that I was with, who was not the best influence. He had grown up like me, except his parents did drugs with him. I never did cocaine again. I graduated Job Corps, and this time I'm 18. I started dating a childhood friend when I was 20, and we had a baby. He was in an accident, and we both abused the pain medications that he was prescribed. Now, this time in my life, I was a functioning addict. However, I did realize that I was prone to codependency. This partner and I, in 2002, got in a domestic violence situation, and the city pressed charges and initiated a no-contact order. My partner was in jail, and his friends started coming by, and I exchanged one habit for another. Bye-bye pain pills, hello meth. Within 1 month, I had lost my apartment. My relationship was over, though we took turns chasing each other for another couple years. February 3rd of 2003, CPS came into our lives. I had a warrant for a failure to appear for a traffic violation, and they took me to jail, and my daughter was taken into custody. I was convinced that I could work through this, and to make a long story short, I had ended up with a caseworker that was just mean. After a year and a half, she was taken off of my case, as a judge had declared her actions cruel and unusual. The caseworker also was connected to my case when I was a child and in the system. I fought for my daughter's return for 2 years. I was alone, and I was afraid of admitting I needed help. Not because I didn't want it, I wanted it, but I was told by others that if I admitted fault and if I accepted services, I would lose her. I eventually gave a dirty UA, which was my way of asking for help, but it was used against me. At the termination trial, I was asked, if you were giving your daughter back today, would you be able to care for her? My answer was, I would still need some help, and that was that. My rights were terminated. I was broken. I literally wandered the streets after court dates and visits, paralyzed from the pain that I was witnessing my child go through. I was living in a state of fight or flight. I was reliving my childhood traumas, and I was desperate for these patterns to change, but I did not know how to do it on my own. I just needed help. Sorry. So I began my recovery journey in 2007. When I was pregnant with my second child. My son and I were separated for a weekend after he discharged from the hospital, and this was due to minimal prenatal care, and that the system showed that I had a previous termination. I had come to the hospital prepared to fight to keep my child. I was determined to be given a chance. I had already surrendered, I had already stopped using, and I had many community and natural supports at this time. From December of 2006 to mid-2015, I was 26 to 35 during this time, and I had the most productive 9 years of my life. During this time, I accomplished a lot of life goals. I overcame many obstacles. I worked a recovery program. I held service positions. I worked through steps. I jumped through the hoops necessary to get my CPS case closed. And in the department's eyes, I became a model parent. I was invited to many community events to share my successes. I was invited to be on parent boards to change policy. I had a sponsor. I graduated from college with honors. I got my AAS degree and became a certified medical assistant, a phlebotomist, a registered x-ray tech, and a sterile field tech, and I opened up my own coffee stand. I got hired at an infusion center. I was loving my life. I had my third child with 0 child welfare involvement. I was breaking patterns, and I was even led to find my oldest daughter who had formerly been adopted. Without realizing it, however, I was spending more time working than focusing on my recovery. My life lost its balance. I quit going to meetings, except for the ones that I was secretary of, and then I gave up my service position altogether because life got too busy. I had 2 kids in elementary school, and they each had extracurricular activities. I had hobbies, and I quit making my recovery a priority. All in all, there was a perfect storm of life that led to my return to use. In 2015, I had injured myself and was prescribed pain medication. I was working as a medical assistant within the same organization that I had gotten health care, and I did not disclose to the physician initially that I was a person in recovery. After a couple of months, I recognized that I was abusing my medication, as well as the prescriber was giving me whatever I had asked for. I recognized how it was affecting my life and work, and I took some time off to go to detox. After 7 days at detox, they convinced me that a 30-day stay would be helpful. The first week into this, I was called by the hospital. My father was being released to hospice. I was the only person who could care for him, and the next 30 days was a blur. I had started buying Suboxone off the streets in hopes that it would keep me from seeking out pills. In Thanksgiving of 2015, my dad passed. By 2016, I started using heroin. This was the first substance that I had used on my own, and not because the person I was with was already using this substance. And to be honest, I was more afraid of this drug than anything else in the world. In an effort to keep my backstory short, I'm going to leave out 2016 to 2020. I'm currently still processing this time in my life in therapy. In 2020, I was pretty much on the street. I started seeing someone that was a friend in hopes that he would help me get off of opiates. I found myself pregnant, again, smack dab in the middle of COVID at 40 years old. Having already had 8 years in recovery, I knew what needed to be done. I was already down to 2/10 of heroin a day, and since I was already on the mission to quit, it was already my goal to get back to my children and my family. I had reached out to Swedish's treatment for chemically dependent women, and they connected me with a provider while I was awaiting a bed date. For the next 6 months, until my son was born, I went back and forth between Subutex and heroin. The medical care that I received was not much prenatally focused as it was addiction focused. That I made 8 contacts with providers during a time that everybody was isolating, I give myself credit for because it was my start. During pregnancy, I connected with the Harm Reduction Doula Collective as they were doing outreach in a mobile medical van. This is where I started wrapping myself with supports. I also connected with Swedish Treatment Center, Vanya Rudolph, who's an addiction medicine specialist in Seattle, who some might be familiar with from being an original advocate of the 5-day compassion stay. I had also connected with the First Clinic. The First Clinic is a medical legal partnership dedicated to preventing trauma associated with family separation. I had already been connected with an agency called REACH, which is a law enforcement assistance and diversion program, which 2 weeks before I went into labor, they had connected me with storage so that I can put all of my belongings somewhere that if my treatment bed came up, I could go. They also issued me an emergency housing voucher. So I'm hoping that all of this is set premise. The 2 stories that I'm actually here to share with you today, this might help fill in some of the gaps and any questions that you might have. I'm gonna pass it to Rachael now.
Thank you, Sarah. Amen. What an incredible story and what bravery to share it. It was important to us that we take a moment at the beginning to really set the context and allow all of you an insight into the story that people are bringing with them when they come to us for care. Her story of stigma is yet still to come. And so this gives perspective of all that goes into a person in a moment when they come to us to help for help and for care. So thank you. We're going to talk about person-first language today, just a quick overview. We're going to talk about how shame might show up for a person seeking care, somebody with substance use disorder reaching out. We're going to talk and learn about how patients are harmed, and specifically Sarah's experience. And then we're going to try to figure out what to do together. I'm here today as one who is on a journey of learning and inviting all of you into that process. I had minimal understanding of some of these concepts and minimal exposure to substance use when I became a nurse. And what I'm offering today is inviting you alongside, if that's you too, if you are also one who needs to understand at a deeper level. That's my personal lived experience, is that I'm changing and growing in uncomfortable ways, and that's what's required for this work, to do this work well. I just want to take a moment. The mental health student in me wants to just acknowledge that we are talking about really difficult things today, and Ali mentioned this as well, that it's important, our self-care is important, and tune in to that, tune into what you're feeling, and pay attention and acknowledge it, and it's okay, and welcome it in, and if you want to take a moment to write it down or, quietly say to yourself what it is that you're dealing with, I encourage you and welcome you to do that individually and together as you like. We're going to start with the power of language. I think that many of you are familiar with person-first language and what that means. It's important because using accurate language that centers the human rather than their experience, and the human's experience rather than their condition, is really important in this work, in the substance use work. It honors an individual's human existence before their disorder, and it's important every time we interact with them. Some individuals, I want to note, use identity-first language, and you're going to hear that. Sarah and I have had conversations about that there are times when her identity as one in recovery is what she wants to center, but ultimately, that's an individual choice and not one that we make for anybody else. So you might hear somebody in recovery refer to themselves as an addict. That's their choice. That's their personal claim to that. It is not okay ever for us to lay that claim on them. So just continuing, it's easy. The society around us reinforces language that is harmful, and so it's an active process all the time, every day, to recenter and come back to person-first language. My work with stigma and bias and reducing that in my own practice and in hopefully those around me in my nursing practice began with the Addiction Policy Forum, and I participated in a training with them, and I'm going to share some of their material today because it's concise and evidence-based and really helpful in couching these concepts.
Stigma is the perception that a certain attribute, like addiction, makes a person unacceptable. And stigma can prevent people from seeking help due to the fear of rejection and discrimination. Stigmatizing labels we use can make those needing help feel less than. So what can we do? Well, we can change our language. When we refer to those who have an addiction, we should always use person-first language, emphasizing the person before the disorder.
We at Addiction Policy Forum, we really focus on making sure that we use language that is non-stigmatizing. We use the term substance use disorder. When you say the word substance abuse, which is sort of an outdated term, when you think of abuse, you think of domestic abuse, you think of child abuse, you think of elder or animal abuse. That is sort of a criminal justice term. right? When in actuality, substance use disorder is a health condition. It's a health condition that's in the DSM-5, that has its own medical subspecialty in the medical field. And so we want to make sure that we're using proper terms that house this correctly within that health sphere that it belongs. We also use person first language. When I talk about my parents or someone in recovery or someone with an active use disorder, I talk about an individual with a substance use disorder. We don't define or limit someone to their illness. We identify them as a person or an individual that is struggling with this health condition, but it does not identify who they are. So avoiding terms like addict, junkie, druggie, whatever it might be. Those are very stigmatizing terms. They may be terms that individuals in recovery may self-identify with, but it's important for us as leaders, family members, friends, and community members that we don't use those terms. We use in recovery, my laundry is clean and dirty, not people. And so I think being really careful about some of these terms that can be weighted and weighted down with judgment is really important. And then a positive or a negative drug test instead of dirty or clean drug test. And then an individual is currently using substances. Again, remember that laundry reminder that we don't talk about folks like their laundry.
Research has shown that the words we use when speaking to or about people struggling with substance use disorders can have a tremendous impact on their health outcomes. To learn more, visit addictionpolicy.org, and remember, language matters.
The Addiction Policy Forum is a great resource and has many great videos. The person first language is a really nice summary if you're needing it as a tool to explain to somebody else or to share with your coworkers or colleagues or friends. It's a particularly helpful one. We're going to move on to stigma as a concept and what it means for us as we interact with it. This was also going to include a video, so I encourage you to watch it from the Addiction Policy Forum. We will not be watching that, but it's really helpful, I think. It's a daunting topic. It's a daunting concept. What is stigma? Where does it exist? And we can divide it out and take it a little bit by bit. One aspect is structural stigma. That exists in the air around us. That's institutions, that's the collective power of societal thinking. That's big and overwhelming and hard to know where to get in and what to do with that. Then there's individual stigma, and that's what we're participating in every day. And we're either participating in it as one who's perceiving stigma, or we're participating in it as one who is a target of stigma. And that's where the relationship, a personal relationship for me, and perhaps for you, can start to form to stigma in general. What is my role here? Where am I participating? How do I then make a difference or change? What do I know of it? Where did it come from? We're going to talk specifically today about the role of perceiver. One who is perceiving stigma about another. The target of stigma is one who is experiencing it. Many of you, perhaps in this room, have been the target of stigma, and that's a role that you occupy, perhaps, and have occupied or may occupy again. We all have the opportunity to experience stigma in our lives for various reasons. Today, I want to make sure that we're understanding this conversation from what our role is in participating as one as a perceiver of stigma, and what do we do with that, and where do we break it down? Why is it important? It's very related to shame, and in pregnancy particularly, the stigma around substance use is completely overwhelming. There's external stigma, where you feel the external structure around you and what they think, what individuals and what the system thinks about you, and that the bad choices or wrong behavior as it's perceived. And that's daunting in and of itself. But pregnancy especially is vulnerable to internal stigma. Internal stigma happens over the course of time as one absorbs that external stigma around them. When those messages and stereotypes about someone like me being something, what does that do over the course of time to psyche, to emotion, to the experience? It's reinforced when one is met with care that's rooted in bias. It increases anxiety, increases depression, reduces and decreases the opportunity for self-love. And it's particularly acute for childbearing individuals because of the additional stigma of pregnancy and what one who is pregnant should be. That's evident everywhere we go. There's thoughts and feelings about a pregnant person and what their behavior, what they should or shouldn't be doing, how they should or shouldn't be acting. And so that internalized shame is really a double whammy for a pregnant person experiencing substance use because of that additional component that they know from the outside world and all the ways the outside world communicates to us that they should feel bad about who they are and what they're doing. And when you're then trying to present to a place that wasn't built for you, that doesn't have people like you taking care of you, what do we do with that? How does that feel? What does that mean for somebody? So the evidence is clear that pregnancy really increases internal shame as it's related to stigma. And I feel like for those of us in this room who are obviously passionate about this topic, it's just so important to recognize that that additional component of pregnancy is added weight to this process and to somebody experiencing substance use disorder. Sarah, are you ready?
Yeah.
Sarah's going to share specifically a really important, specific, concrete example of the way that stigma ended in patient harm.
On 7/26/21, a day after my 41st birthday, I went into labor. My water broke and I presented at the hospital, absolutely afraid of losing my son. Though I had been through this once before, I was not in active addiction at that time. Though I had connected myself with supports, I was living in an RV. I was ready to leave this all behind. I had wished that I would have been able to do it sooner. I kept going back and forth in my mind from negative to positive. I had called ahead to Swedish Medical Center, First Hill, and let them know that I was on my way. I shared that my water broke, I am awaiting a bed at Ballard Swedish treatment program, and that I have had minimal prenatal care. When I got there, I spent the first 6 or so hours in a triage type room on labor and delivery connected to monitors. I was finally brought to my own room where I was asked some more questions by a nurse. She asked me my living situation, substance use, the last time that I used. I had told her this morning, and I tried to tell her how much I used daily, but she did not seem interested. In my mind, this was important. She was very short and cut me off and continued her assessment. The whole time she assessed me, she didn't make eye contact, she didn't let me elaborate, and her next and last question was, do you have any open sores? I am sure that my response to this may have set the tone for the night, but her attitude and horrible bedside manner had me not only feeling very judged and unsafe, but also pushed me so far out of character that my recollection of what I said was, I want a different nurse, you are being a judgmental bitch. My partner doesn't remember. My partner doesn't remember me having said that, God bless him. I was given a different nurse. The next thing that came up was pain management. And even though I was in pain, I was convinced that it would create a better picture of me if I declined pain medication. After some hours, I opted for an epidural. In Seattle, they do what is called a walking epidural, which takes the pain away but allows for more bodily awareness than a full epidural. After two decelerations of my baby's heart rate in the mid-60s, my room became full of nurses and doctors. It was like the whole hospital was in my room. They said, it's time to have this baby, Sarah. We quickly went over the pros and cons of forceps assistance, and with 2 more contractions, of which I was poorly pushing through, my son was born. NICU was in the room, but was excused after his APGAR score was 7 and then 9. The next 50 minutes or so were a complete blur to me, but what I did remember was that I was feeling pressure between my legs. I called in a nurse and let her know that I am feeling something down there and it hurts. And she insisted that I must need to go to the bathroom. She said that I am likely going through withdrawal, and can I please go to the bathroom and clear out my bowels, is what she said. I remember that in order to get to the bathroom, I had to use muscle memory to walk. I was telling myself a foot in front of the other and just getting myself there, but I couldn't feel my legs entirely. I was baffled by this response because what I was feeling was definitely not withdrawal. But I listened to her, and I went to the bathroom, and I sat on the toilet, and I was left there for about 45 minutes. And all honestly, I don't remember a lot of what was going on, as they had started me on Subutex, and it was a much higher dose than I had been on. And so, a much higher dose than I had already been taking. I was exhausted from just having had a baby. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I pushed and pushed for a while, trying to go to the bathroom, but I couldn't. I felt at one point that my body just started like pushing over. And I know that sounds weird, but it was like my body was rhythmically contracting again, kind of like it was when I was delivering my placenta. That said, I got up and was just in more pain. I stood in the shower thinking it might help some. At that point, a nurse came in and told me, absolutely do not poop in the shower. I couldn't believe how she was treating me, and I just started crying. My partner got mad and went to get a different nurse. At this time, I stepped out of the shower, and I felt something protruding from my bottom. I was horrified, and I decided the only way I was going to get help is if I laid down all dignity, and I went and I laid on the bed, and I uncovered my bottom, and I faced towards the door, and I just cried. It is likely that what I was originally feeling that I had told the nurse about was a hematoma from the birth and the forceps used to assist in delivery. But after instructing me to go to the bathroom and leaving me unattended for so long, when I was still completely numb and needed observation and support, I ended up with a rectal prolapse the size of a large mango. The next nurse that came in rushed over to my bed, freaking out, and the next thing I know, I was rushed off to surgery. My next 3 weeks were spent in the hospital. I went through multiple surgeries and multiple blood transfusions. I was on 21 days of broad-spectrum antibiotics through IV. I had a urine catheter for weeks. I had to wear a diaper. They had me on so much laxatives that I had no control of my bowels, all while trying to bond with my newborn and navigate the complexities of a child welfare intervention. During this time, I kept telling myself this is my karma for having used while I was pregnant, for not having got my shit together. My son was born healthy and happy. However, I didn't get to bond with him much at this point. All my energy was going into healing. My doula and my partner and the rest of my support team pulled through and cared for baby. After our court hearing, it was determined that baby would go home with dad. At this time, home was a shelter. But because of my condition, him and our baby roomed in with me the whole time that I was at the hospital. I was so grateful for my addiction medicine specialist during this time, Vanya Rudolph. Not only did she show up for the virtual CPS meetings and court dates, she advocated for me, but she also convinced me that my addiction can be arrested. She started to help me change the negative self-talk that had throughout this been one of my worst adversaries. Every day she checked on me, and if it wasn't a new message that she put on my whiteboard reminding me of my strength and recognizing my resilience, then she was encouraging me to take control of my narrative. Her positivity, transparency, compassion, and determination to remove obstacles for me was contagious. The people on my care team also started treating me with compassion and dignity. As I had said, I was there for 3 weeks, and the safety plan was that I was going to complete inpatient treatment at Swedish ARS program. Once I was physically well enough to discharge from the hospital, they transferred me to the treatment program. They also counted the time that I was in the hospital towards my treatment. I was able to complete their stabilization program in another 7 days or so. It was hard for me to be away from my son during this time. For the next 7 days, I called my partner throughout the night, every 2 to 3 hours when I pumped, and he would feed our baby. Sometimes I was able to get in a video call. I worked really hard to keep producing milk. During this time, my doula would pick up my milk from the treatment center and bring it to my partner. In the video visit, when I seen my little guy, I had this gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I had no idea what, but he seemed small to me. It really had me wanting to leave and be with him, but I stuck it out. I knew the importance of staying. When I got out, we spent the next 24 hours lounging around and just loving on each other and bonding. I was so happy to be home and so happy to be on this journey, and so grateful for the way things had went, knowing that they could have gone way worse. That said, the next day I took my son in for a checkup and to get some shots. Unfortunately, at this time, my worries were confirmed, and he had not been gaining weight. He was reported to be below his birth weight, which was in the 1 percentile. They did a demonstration to confirm that we were making bottles appropriately. We were. They sent us home with the goal of focusing on getting him full. They said that if he started acting strange, to bring him into the emergency room. The next day on 8/1/2025, 8/1/2021, he was hard to rouse from his sleep. I unclothed him and brought him into the shower with me. I still could barely get him to wake. We quickly got on the freeway and headed to the hospital. On our way there, we called and let his pediatrician know that due to traffic, we were going to Children's Hospital instead. We had been forewarned of stories of judgment and stigma at this hospital before we had arrived. One in particular by a friend whose son's Mongolian spots were reported as bruises, and their child was removed from their care for a week. In my heart, I just wanted the best care for my son, and it was the quickest place to get him to. We arrived at Children's Hospital and were met in the emergency room by an ER tech, and they began their intake assessment. It was my hope that our timeline since his birth would be accessible from their computer system. We, for the most part, had only 1 day from birth to now that we weren't being observed by some kind of health professional or person on our safety plan. I had told them I am a mother in recovery. I shared that I breast and bottle feed. I tried to be as transparent as I could and upfront so as to give them enough information that we could build a rapport of open communication. I explained I just got out of treatment a few days ago and that Dad had been caring for baby during this time. I even explained over the last week that I was in treatment, that I would call him every 3 hours during the night and that I would wake him up and he would feed baby while I pumped and we would sit on the phone together and do this. Children's Hospital has what they call a SCAN team, and SCAN stands for Safe Child and Adolescent Network. SCAN is a clinical team which includes child abuse board certified physicians and social workers with expertise in child abuse and neglect. They are brought in when there is a serious concern for abuse and neglect, and then they take the lead on care for the patient moving forward. Needless to say, in enters SCAN. This is where the questions started to get really critical. They separated me and my partner, and when they brought us back together, they had determined that my son was not being fed appropriately, that he was failing to thrive, and it was due to environmental factors, us. Of course, at this point, alarms are going off in my mind. I wanted to leave there and bring him to the hospital that he was born at because they had a clearer picture of what had been happening over the last month. Our doula, Chelsea, arrived at this time for support. I was so grateful for even a witness to what was going on and someone to attest to our truth. There was no way that he was not being fed. I tried to correct this, but they ran with it. I had figured out that what Ryan, my kid's dad, had reported to them was that he was feeding little Ryan 2 heaping scoops of formula in a bottle every 3 to 4 hours. In my mind, there was nothing wrong with this. I absolutely became distrustful. I wanted to leave. They said that they would call the police. They were forcing me to choose between protecting my child from stigma and bias and prejudice by bringing him to another hospital or just letting him be seen there. I chose to let him be seen because I knew that a report of me taking my child out of the hospital when he clearly needed help would be seen as medical neglect. So despite that, they were trying to blame my partner for not feeding our son, we stayed. If you can imagine, this has put us at a defense. We did not feel safe. We did not feel a part of our son's care team. We, in their eyes, were the cause of his suffering. Eventually, it came to my awareness that Dad Ryan had told the SCAN team that the bottles we were using were 10-ounce bottles. I figured out later that Dad had mistaken the net weight of the box for the size of the bottle. It was actually a 4-ounce Dr. Brown's bottle that he was filling with 2 heaping scoops of formula. So he had made a mistake. I tried to clear this up until I was blue in the face to whoever would listen to me, but nobody took us seriously, and a new CPS case was opened. It was a nightmare. We spent the next 15 days in fight mode, all while trying to care for and love on this little baby who was in pain, hungry, and suffering. He had tubes and wires all over. It was horrifying. We went through every kind of we went through every kind of formula trying to troubleshoot milk protein allergies, formula sensitivity. I was struggling to keep my milk up due to stress, and they weren't letting me feed him. They said, "Mother does want to breastfeed, however, due to COVID, they have not been able to UA. At this time, due to mother's behaviors, relapse cannot be ruled out. Therefore, breastfeeding will not be allowed." Somewhere around day 8, I just started giving him my milk at the breast whenever I could. He would keep that down, likely because it wasn't too much. As I had said, a new CPS case was opened, so in the midst of all this, we had a virtual court hearing where they determined that they were going to take him into custody, that obviously the safety plan that was in effect was not protecting this child. They wanted us to feed him the highest level of fortified formula, 3 ounces every 3 hours. This was not working for him. He was throwing it up. We started feeding him hourly, 1 ounce an hour, and he wouldn't throw it up if we burped him well after each ounce. There was one time that we told the nurses that we had just fed him 1 ounce and explained that he cannot eat more than that, and we'll be right back. We went down to meet a family member, and when we came back up, we found him lying in his vomit because they had came in and force-fed him another 2 ounces. By day 9, everyone was stumped as to what was going on with him. There were reports of refeeding syndrome, reports that his stomach lining is probably gone, which is why he's throwing up like he is. They ruled out GERD. They ruled out milk allergies. The morning of day 10, I had a pediatrician come in, and instead of standing on everything up to that moment, she asked us, "What do you think is going on? What do you want to be done? Do we have any questions?" She sat and brainstormed with us, and this is the first time that had happened, and we'd already been there for 10 days. I was able to explain to her about the net weight of the bottle being mistaken by my partner as the size of the bottle, that he misspoke when put on the spot, and that we have been made out to be horrible people who are not feeding our baby when that wasn't happening. I asked her, what would you do if we had just came in? I asked her to take this back to square one. I asked her to set aside all judgment of feeding incorrectly and take only the obvious facts of his presentation into mind. She said she would do an ultrasound to rule out anything anatomical. Sometimes babies present around 4 weeks with a condition called pyloric stenosis. She said that the first ultrasound had ruled this out. I asked her to please do it again. She agreed that it was worth trying. Our baby was dying, and since we had been there, he was not getting better. He had gotten worse. We spoke about next steps. I had asked if they could give him a GI tube and tube feed him. At that time, she said it wasn't necessary because he would likely just throw up the tube. The end of day 10, they took him for a second ultrasound and ruled out pyloric stenosis. We spent the next 5 days locked into a ritual of feeding him 1 ounce every hour, him being poked in his poor bruised heels each night at the same time, where we would also weigh him for the day and see if he had gained or lost weight. Often he was losing weight or staying the same. Even a gram of weight gain was a win. We were not willing to let go of the hope we had that we would get through this, despite all that was stacking up against us. Day 15, they had determined that they were going to take him down for an upper GI study. During this time, they sent a chaplain down to start talking with us. While we were on our way to the study, a man in a suit that I had never seen before stopped us in the hallway to let us know that there was an error in reading the ultrasound, that our son did in fact have pyloric stenosis. He asked us if we wanted to discuss this. I think he was trying to protect everyone because rightfully so, we had every right to be angry. This was not our concern. Our concern was what needed to be done to fix this. Last slide. It turns out all he would need was a simple surgery. They placed a GI tube to get him some nutrients to prepare for surgery. He took those feeds well. He had the surgery, and just like that, he started healing. For the next 6 days, he gained weight, and he smiled for the first time. Our CPS case was closed with prejudice, and we were discharged. My poor little baby was tortured for over 2 weeks. We as parents, me as a mother newly reclaiming my recovery, were put to the ultimate test. He could have died, and it wouldn't have been because of anything we did, but it might have been blamed on us. And all because a care provider misdiagnosed my son based on his judgment of me as a person. Were we able to show that? Can you go back to yeah. I wanted to share some of the stigmatizing statements that were said. Dr. Adams has significant concern with child being discharged to parents. With the extent of the malnutrition, it's likely his intestines have no lining, which would make him more sensitive to formula. The hospital does not believe it's a sustainable plan for him to discharge home, and there was severe negligence in not seeking care earlier. Social work staff at Seattle Children's did confirm with the hospital that they were given very strict instruction and ample time to learn how to appropriately feed Ryan. They cannot speak to why exactly this happened, but very concerned for ongoing care and parents' understanding of how it got to this point. And they have drug concerns. Father did say last week that he did have concerns for the level of stress they're experiencing that will be difficult, and he has concerns for relapse. Also, during this time, they did drug testing on my son multiple times without talking to me about it. It's my hope that these experiences being brought to light serve to protect others. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to take a moment and offer a chance for everyone to think about how that could have happened with somebody you know, somebody you've taken care of, an institution where you work. When I first heard Sarah's story, the depth of it for me was that I could see how it could happen. In my place of work, with my coworkers, I can see how the institutional stigma, the structural stigma is so pervasive. It gets away. It gets away from us. It's our job to bring it back and to remember. I'm wondering if anybody has thoughts that they want to share, if you want to take a moment at your tables to integrate this, and how you might carry this story with you going forward. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for your vulnerability, Sarah. It takes a lot to go up there and share this. Oh, I don't know if I need that. But it takes a lot to go up there and share your story with us. And unfortunately, many of us have experience with similar things or have seen similar things happen. But a reminder that we do heal and we do get better and we are standing up and showing up for this work is huge. Thank you for taking that spot.
Goodness gracious. That is my girl. I'm so proud of you, for just sharing that with us, especially knowing the job that we do every single day and how it is so possible for us to walk with clients and hear all of these things that they're experiencing and believe them and listen to what they're saying and not necessarily being able to change it, but just being a part of their story and their journey. And you do that so effortlessly, and I just want to say thank you for your story, and also just thank you for the person that you are as a human being. You're a really good person, and I'm so proud of you. I'm proud to work with you because she's my coworker. And I also, just hearing your story, I cannot help but think about we deal with a lot of different stories every single day. Every single day, caseloads are crazy. Each person has a history of their own, and how difficult it can be, like you were saying, when you add pregnancy to each story, how much that changes the story. And then when you add race to the story and everything in between, and how much people are actually walking in trauma on a regular basis. And so I think that it's important for us to think about and just humanize people. No one is bigger, better, badder than. I think that we all owe each other some compassion and ourselves some compassion for our experiences, and that keeps us more alike than we are unalike.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing. We're going to bring it back to what do we do with, oh, sorry, I just saw.
I was just going to say, I think what your story so importantly points out is
like the concern that I have for the systematic power that we give these child abuse specialist doctors, because they're doctors, and then they say they're child abuse specialists, and I know because I did work at child welfare that when they say something, we're supposed to just follow in line. The concern that the medical community is actually having is that this is a new field, and doctors learn and nurses learn by seeing their mistakes in action, and I know that that's not what we want to hear as like people who go to a doctor, but when I listen to a doctor speak on this, the child abuse specialists don't follow cases. So they don't know when they diagnosed a child with a bruise on a Monday, and then on a Friday, somebody figured out it was something else. They don't follow cases, they just come in and say something. So what the medical community has been talking about is there's not a lot of education and learning within this field. So what I would like to take from your story is that we educate ourselves and fight back about the systematic power of just blatantly believing what a child abuse specialist doctor says. They are needed, they are important, there are horrific cases that they work on. I've worked with them on horrific cases. There are times when it's very, very, very helpful, but understand that like everybody makes mistakes, right? And so what power are we giving and who are we giving that power to?
Thank you. Well, one more, yes. Mm-hmm.
As part of that, I would really emphasize to all of you who are writing notes that may come to child welfare, that child welfare takes those notes and takes things out of context. A couple of years ago, I had a case with a baby, and one of the allegations was malnutrition, and that allegation was based on a note by an ER resident, and I know enough because of my family to know that PGY1 in early August meant this was a person who had barely graduated from medical school, and wrote in their note, baby is sucking at the bottle, acting very hungry, diagnosis malnutrition. But most people don't know what a PGY1 means. It doesn't mean that this person knows less than your average mother about about what all of this means. And so I just urge you, every one of you, who writes notes in charts, who writes notes anywhere in documentation, that your speculation is often taken as fact.
Amen. Thank you both for those very tangible ways that this matters. What does it all mean? What do we do? How do we change? How do we grow? Be self-curious. Allie talked about being curious about your patients and the people you're interacting with, and I would encourage you to be self-curious too. Where did you get your thoughts about your patient that you're interacting from? From where did they come? And is that a place that source, is that a valid source? Is that a source that you want to lean into? Is that a source that you want to challenge? We all inherit it around us. We're part of it, whether we want to be or not. I think about Ibram Kendi, who talks about what it means to be anti-racist, and that you can't simply just declare that you are not racist, that because of the pervasiveness of the racism in our structures, it requires active deconstruction around you. That applies to stigma. It's not enough to say, I don't have bias. You have to actively participate in how it's being broken down inside yourself and then also around you. Seems to me like many of you, all of you, know this already, and I offer it humbly as simply a reminder to return to that work. Continue to center the patient. Recognize that change of how you interact. It might feel hard, might feel uncomfortable, but that's what growth is about. And then identify the small changes that you want to make and find ways to empower and acknowledge your patient. Sarah has an important piece that we want to end on, which is that there was a moment in her care that really changed the course for her, and it included affirmation.
So when I was in the hospital bed and having had just, delivered my child, wasn't sure where things were going, and still like stuck in an active addiction, like getting out of it, but stuck in it at that time, that the self-talk that I had within myself was my biggest adversary, as I had said. And so like when Vanya Rudolph had came in there and started changing the narrative by putting on the board about my resilience and just stating things like, she put things on there like that acknowledged my courage, highlighted my resilience, and recognized my love for my baby. And just the changing of that voice in my head was really important for me being able to make it out of all that struggle.
Let's all be Vanya Rudolph. I want to highlight the addictionpolicy.org on there for the videos that we were not able to play today, and one last round of applause for Sarah for her bravery.